Good morning. On a good Yantiv. Mitla Rebbe's Geula. We're on page 162 in bottom of page 162 in Hemshech Sadik Dalet. Okay. So what did we learn till now? To explain the level 3 of Bittul, where he says that the Bittul of Eir, Efes Biltecha, is such that the only Mitzias is Atzmus. So he asked the question, so then what exactly is this level? If you say it's Bittul, a bottle, that means there's some Mitzias. So if that's the case, what makes it different than level 2? On the other hand, what makes it different than Atzmus itself is nothing but Atzmus. So what's the difference in the level that's bottled to Atzmus that reveals nothing but Atzmus and Atzmus? So to explain that, he said, we need to go to what we learned, that there's 3 things in Eir: Mitzias, Kiyum, and Gilui. Now the Mitzias is the Eir as it's encompassed within the Moyer, he said. Kol Ladayim B'Moyer, and from there will come Kiyum and Gilui, and he didn't explain further. It will be explained shortly, soon. He went, Ayin, that Yedua, there's 3 levels in the Eiris. And we're now talking about level number 1. Eiris K'meshen Klulim Ba'er Ein Sev Baruch Hu. And those are the 10 hidden spheres. The Eir, as it's still within the source, so to speak, of Eir Ein Sof, and that is the level of the 10 hidden spheres. There's no actual expression yet. It's within, as I said, within, let's say, the artist is envisioning what they'll be like. And he calls this Antu Chad. Antu Chad, which is oneness, Yochid. Now, to understand Yochid, which means Yochid be'etzem, he's fundamentally one. Not one as an Echad, which is Protim. Echad means Isachdus HaProtim, you're connecting many details. Yochid is Yochid be'etzem. To explain that, that the Esses Fisagnusa Yochadus, they're united and one with Eir Ein Sof, and also the 10 spheres themselves are utterly connected and unified. Actually, I shouldn't say connected. No, there's no details. They're all in a state of yichud. In other words, if you talk about an artist envisioning, it's all one vision. There's no details, no specifics. And kiyudua hefresh bein echad leyachid. The echad is isachdus haprotim, the unification of details. That means details have emerged. And after you have separate details, you come and say they all are included, and you connect them, you unite them. That's echad. Yachid, on the other hand, means it's fundamentally unique and oneness, not a oneness that's connected to details. So there's no details yet. So now to explain this, the long mashal that we learned yesterday was with Koyach. We'll understand from the Koyach HaTenua, the power of movement. So let's sum up what we learned about that. And then we'll continue on where he's going to connect it back to Echad, to Yachad and Yachid. Okay, so a long discussion here, this whole page, that he explained, like all Koyachas begin, in other words, the faculties that a human being has, all begins with a potential general state before it's become an actual faculty. So in this case, the Koyach Yuli, he calls it. Koyach Kloli Hu Yuli. What is it? And then within that, there's going to be Koyachis, what he calls Protim Klolim. There's already some faculty there, but it's still a general one. And from that, and that would in turn includes many details, but it's already now become some type of breakdown. And now he spells it out, these 3 levels. Hayuli is the fact that every living entity is movable, is a moving entity. Even when you're asleep, even when you're stationary, A chai is, by definition, a moving entity. But that's hiyuli. That's a very general, overall statement. Does not talk about any particular movement, whether movement of one part or another. Then he said that kol hiyuli al kol hamine tenuas, any movement that will come one way or another, the kamas rebeichus, meaning a large form of movement or qualitative movement, is all beyond Giluim. He says, Muslal Makola Giluim Sheboim Memenu. Okay. Okay. Then we go, the next step is Protim Klolim, which means now we're going to be speaking about different ways that the human body moves. He's talking about the human body. We'll talk about the human body. So what does he say? This is specific forms of movement that the chai can move about. And he says, and there are different types, and there are different general categories, and then the general categories have breakdown of specific. So he says, in general, the human body breaks into three parts. I mean, to tell you the truth, he doesn't say human, but it's clearly human because he uses different forms of movement that relate to humans, writing and dancing and so on. So he says like this. The three parts is the guf, the reish, guf, and regel, the head, the body, and the legs. Those are protim klolim. So there's the head, movement of the head, the movement of the body, and movement of the legs. And each one of them, there's specific forms of movement. With the head, he used the example, he said, squinting the eyes, burrowing the brow, what I say, like frowning, essentially. Kmitas mitzche means when a person burrows their not burrows, the when you do like this with your forehead. Furrowing the brow. Movement of the lips. And the movement of the head one way or another. In the body, he said, he used examples, and specifically the arms, the hands. You have lifting a heavy or light weight. You have writing and drawing. And then, of course, every different type of work. And for the leg, he used walking, dancing, jumping, and leaping. So he says, see, here you see that all the koyach hatnua hakloli hayuli is now in the each part of the body has its own particular formation, form and shape, and that in turn breaks down into more. And then even in writing itself, there's the different shape of how you use your movement when you write an aleph from how you write a beis. So basically, based on the function and the objective of whatever activity or work you want to achieve, the movement is fitting that particular objective. Okay. And then he concludes on this mashal. He says, now, even though they all come from that particular faculty that's moving, let's say the fingers writing, nevertheless, you have to say they all come from the general power of movement, all the way back to the fact that the human being is a moving entity, that the kol chai, that is everything that's alive, is a moving entity. The koyach hiyuli. So you really have two aspects here. You have it all originates from that general power of movement, capacity to move, and at the same time, it's being channeled specific types of movement one way or another. So I'm going to continue reading now. Even though we read it, I'll read it again. I'm reading from around 10 lines from the bottom, page 162. The line begins, Umishunim. I'm going to start Ubehechle Chadavar. And we'll read from there now. So he says like this, Ubehechle Chadavar. This matter compels us to say, Ubehechle Chadavar, you have to say, Shaloi kol hakoyach kulei, k'mei sheyotze mikoyach hakloli haprati. not the entire faculty as it emerges from the Koyach Koli Prati. What's the Koli Prati? Is like the goof, in this case, the Yadayim. The fingers have ability to move. So when they do, not the entire faculty, so when you're writing, you have already allocated and so-called designated a certain amount of energy and focus on writing. He says not the entire koyach, he says, comes revealed in this specific movement.
Something I put something on the camera read a blog.
Hainu.
About no.
Hainu. This means the gam achli asese hatanua. That after you finish doing that movement, let's say writing an aleph and a beis or a beis, nishar ma'at mashalei baba peil. Some of that, let's call it the energy of that faculty, still remains that was not actualized. Hine kasher hu noch memaloches avedose pulase. So then when he rests and he stops the movement. So let's say you sat down to write a letter and your fingers moving. So all the energy that you have to write a letter was not all used up. It's not all the entire faculty of writing was used in this. So some of it remains. And then when you stop writing, he says, when you stop, when you rest, actually, you know what? I have to give a different mashal. I think the mashal I'm giving is confusing, to be honest. I think what he's saying is the following. The mashal I used is correct, but maybe a better mashal would be when you, let's say, well, here, the letter, but let's say you build something. Let's say you're carving a sculpture, or you're taking clay and you're using your koyach prati to build something. You're shaping the clay into a pot. So there's a certain amount of energy you invested in it, in the movement, but there's some of it that remains not so-called, what's the word I want to use? Not expended. The problem I'm having is, so when you rest, he's saying the faculty, that part that wasn't used, goes back. But what about the part that was used? It also goes back. I'm not clear what he means here, to be honest. That's what I'm struggling with. I could understand that, for example, you put energy into throwing a stone. So there's a certain amount of energy that is carrying the stone, but there's energy that you have in the throwing that remains with you. So he's saying when you stop the effort, so-called the energy you have recedes back into the source. That's what it looks like he's saying. But I'm not positive that's what he means exactly. Because I'll just read it again. So he says, just a moment. Kloli Prati, he said clearly, the Keches Prati in Klolim is the Reish, the Guf, and the Regel. So in the Guf, in the hands, is the power of movement. Yeah, you have to say something like what I just said, that when you invest, let's say, in writing, so a certain amount has been extended into the writing, the energy that remains, the power and faculty that remains, recedes back into its source because you're not applying it, you stopped writing. So what happens with your koyach haksiva, the power of movement that's necessary in writing? He says that when you stop, what happens is, hanisha, koyach hatnu hanisha, shaloi bo lepeil. So I guess he means that the power of movement that you used in the writing of the letter is now, the letter has been written. Excuse me. So that's there. A product has been produced due to your movement. What happens with the energy, the power of movement that you have that remains with you? It recedes back, he says. It goes back into the keche proti klali, into the arms, the hands, which is the body that has the capacity to make different type of movements. That's what he's saying. Hine oz nase echad. They all become one again. So in other words, when you're sitting and writing, you're writing an aleph and beis, there's pratim, there's actual details. The movement that creates an aleph and the movement that creates a beis is a different movement. But when they recede back into the power, into the faculty, in the power of movement, they become one. Lies, being the hisachduzu hare'ena ela hisachdus haprati. This type of unification is what he said was about echad, not yochid. It's only the unification of the detail. No, it was the detail that was manifest in the particular form of movement is now reconnecting, like he said at the top of the page. Chezim v'nechlolim b'kedem. So hisachdus hapratim. We're not talking about the fundamental power to move. You're talking about the specific way of movement that you did now is now connecting back to the original uniting back with its original source, so to speak. Something like you would say, like, let's say the tide. The water comes rushing with the ocean as the tide. So the water comes up on the beach. We can grab some of that water. Or, even a better example, a geyser. A geyser, what does geysers do? They from time to time, they, like in Yellowstone Park, what do? They burst open. Geyser lets out water. You can grab that water, and then the water recedes back into its original source. So this is what he's calling his achdus of pratim. So the prat that emerged in the particular movement is going back to its original place, which is the power of movement of whatever that place comes all the way back to the koyachiyuli b'pashtus. Okay, this means, I still don't understand why the moshel is so necessary to explain this, but I believe the moshel is connected to the three levels in Oyer. That's what I think, that's what I suspect. But let's just continue learning and then we'll figure out why he's saying all of this. So he says, V'hainu, this means the levad zeis, the echad moira al dover, shalom hamitztaref meprotim. Beside that echad, the word echad indicates on a complete entity that is made up of details. So let's say you have any composite. You have an item. You have your mobile phone. It's echad because there's many different details that all come together in one entity. Or for that matter, a bunch of human beings, a minyan for davening. 10 people come together as one call. That's called a minyan. Good. He says, besides that's what echad is, one complete entity that is mitztaref, made up of joining parts. Like it says, there was evening, there was morning, one day. What is echad there? Sheyem shalom kelul, or the Rebbe says kolul is the word kelul is extra. Sheyem shalom, a complete day, kolul is encompassed of, is comprised of ma'apratim delayla v'yem. That's what it means. Vahi erev, vahi beker, vahi erev, not just erev, but also beker. Yem echad. So echad consists of night and day. V'oz nikra b'shem ha'toyer echad. And then you call it by the name, by the descriptive name called one. It's one. In other words, it's one, not many. The many have come together as one entity. You call it one day. You don't call it half. You don't call it half night, half day, half night, half morning, half evening. One day consists of two parts. He says, Levadzes, besides this, besides the fact that echad means a complete entity that's comprised of details, it also unites the details. And the mashal he gave with koyach hatanua means that even when the tanua comes into a prat, a detail, and it returns back, recedes back into its source, it's in a form of echad. Again, I'm not sure what this mashal really adds in this particular thing. Why couldn't we understand it from basic principles? But I think it will be understood as we learn on. Unless somebody has a thought on this whole arichus, all coming to explain what echad is.
It shows that something that was originally Yachid can go to the state of Echad. Is that what we're pointing out?
I don't think so. Well, you know what? Let's finish. We'll see. Right now, it sounds like that this was all an example of protim going to a state of echad, not yachid and echad. Maybe. Let's read on now what yachid is, and maybe then it'll become clear what you're saying. I don't know. Let me read a few more lines, and then we'll analyze it. Aval yachid. This is all echad. So details, it's one entity made up of details, and the details are united now together. Aval yachid. No, let's say by day and night, not just that one day is made up of morning and evening. There's also a joining of morning and evening. They like join together as one entity. Okay. So he says like this now. Aval yachid is something else entirely. You say yachid, hu shemiyuchad be'etzem. That is fundamental and utter oneness, not the oneness of details. It is one beyond everything. Like he's going to say, Antu Chad. She'en sham inyan de klal prat. She'en sham inyan de klal prat. I'm on top of page 163. There's no inyan of klal and prat, of a general entity and a detail. Like we said with koyach hatanua, for example. There's the general power of movement and there's the specific movement. There's no klal and prat. V'hu kamoy koyach hatanua haprati kedem shepoil. Yeah, now he's going back to the mashal, to this. So now we're not talking about the specific detail, the specific movement that had a particular function. We're talking the specific movement before it emerged. In other words, not when you wrote Ayin Beis, or you walked, or you danced, or details of it, but before it became a specific movement, how it was still, how it was all part of the general power of movement of something that is alive. In other words, your hand has the power to move. When you move it and you turn it into a writing function, it writes letters. That's details. When you finish the specific movement returns back. That's echad. But how was the power of movement before it actually emerged? It was all miyuchad be'etzem. In the Tanua HaKlali. That's what he's saying here. So you have both aspects to it. There's the yachid and the echad in the mashal of Tanua. Still a little abstract, I think, for me at least. But I would continue reading and then seeing how this develops before I analyze it. Unless somebody wants to comment on this, feel free. I don't fully understand it myself. I mean, I could speculate, but I'm hesitating, speculating. I'd rather read it inside before we really speculate. I mean, I will say this. What it sounds like to me is I'm just going to use my own example, not movement. When you say a person is an intelligent person, they have seichel. They haven't used the seichel yet. You just know this is an intelligent person. They have strong brain power. Maybe you know it from previous experience, but someone has a koyach seichel, koyach chazak. Then they actually use it. They sit down and they learn something or they teach something. Specifics. Explain an idea, and when you see them explaining, you realize, wow, this person really is an intelligent, a brilliant, a scholar. Now in the detail, obviously you're not going to see all their intelligence, but you'll see enough that it's coming from there. The seichel kloli has now become a seichel prati. And students have taken from it, have learned it, derived from it, and take it home with them. The seichel, after he finishes teaching, the teacher, his seichel goes back and recedes back into his brilliant mind. So if you distinguish between the specific seichel that he's communicating, which also originates from the seichel kloli, the fact that he has, that he's a brilliant scholar, and you can distinguish that from how it's inside of him before he begins to teach, that sounds like the difference in echad and yachid. In echad, take the details, and the details as they connect to his intelligence. So there's details that are mesachid aprotim yachad, which is connected to this person's intelligence. But if you take it's how it's in its original state in his mind, before it emerges, there it's in a state of yachid be'etzem. It's not, doesn't have any specifics. It's just fundamentally a brilliant person, a brilliant mind, and that brilliant mind has the capacity to explain many different details. I feel that this is something like what he's saying, the same thing with Tanua. When you're actually moving your fingers or whatever the movement is, I gave all the examples, whether squinting your eyes, and then you stop squinting, so the koyach hatanua recedes back, but that is already, it emerged as a detail, and now it's connecting back to the power to move. You can squint your eyes again later. How about how it was before you began to squint, before you began any movement? So there's a power of movement, but it's not expressed yet. And there it's still in a state of yachid. That's, to me, seems to be what he's saying here. Now, why is this so vital in understanding the whole picture? I think that may emerge, but I think that's enough for now. I hope that was helpful. I mean, that's talking it through a bit. But let's see now where he's going to go further with this. Yeah, I think that makes sense. That feel a little more clarity a bit. Remember, all this is coming to explain the 10 hidden spheres, how they are miyuchid be'etzem before they become details. So I think once we learn that, we've many times seen, once you learn the nimshal, the moral, you understand the mashal better. And then you understand why he's been using it. We see that happen a few times. So that's what I suggest we do. We continue learning, we see how he goes, where he goes with this, and then we'll go back and see why he used this mashal. It's probably coming down to explaining how lifnei tzimtzum is a state of yachid, not echad, because nothing emerged yet. It's so-called God saying, I want to have the power of movement, or I want to have the power of creation, but I've not yet created 10 spheres. So it's still in that state where it's not yet emerged into specifics. And echad is the process of how we ma'ached the details of existence back to the divine energy that gives them energy, that sustains them. I think that's where he's going with this. So the first level of Oyer would be how it's all within the source, Yochid, in a state of Miyuchid Be'etzem. I think that's the place we're going, and let's see. As you know, if I'm wrong, I'm the first person, I'll correct myself. The Ima Yes, now he continues. You just told me Yochid Be'etzem is that the Tanu Klali and there's no details. But there's an issue here. And the issue is, the Keich HaTanu is a specific faculty. It is a prat. V'ima yesh Keich HaTanu hu nivdal mishari HaKeiches. No. I correct myself. That's not what he's qualifying. He's saying v'imayes, and even though the power of movement, shekech hatanua, who nivdul meshari hakeches, it's different. It's distinct from the other faculties. With what? Shu'emed muchan lifel. Kech hatanua, by definition, means the power of movement, means it's not some abstract state. It's ready to move. In other words, once you've made the decision, you're going to write something, or you're going to walk, you're going to move somewhere, you're going to use your body, your head, body, or legs to move. So the Keich HaTanu is ready to go, Which I think he's saying, so why are you telling me that it's miyuchid be'etzem into the Keich, so-called within the kolol benefesh? It's already a so-called a faculty that is on the verge of actualizing itself. Koyach HaSeichel, for example, is lav davka muchan lifel. You can have a brilliant mind and not at all express it. Even when you express it, a lot of it remains. Koyach HaTanu is an actionable type of faculty. It's movement. It means the power to move, different than the power to understand ideas. But let's see again where he's going with this. Because it was discussed, explained earlier. The Rebbe says, Perek Tezayin. The Keiches HaNefesh, that the faculties of the spirit, of the soul, Hem Evre HaNefesh. They're like limbs of the soul. Kumoi HaEvarim Beguf. Notice what we learned, if you recall then, I'm just looking back to see, when was this? Yeah, it's a while back. Oh, with Rotzen. Wow. One minute. Okay, so we learned earlier the Keiches HaNefesh, Hem Evri HaNefesh. So the body and soul are both made up of parts. The body, we call them limbs, organs, parts, and components. He says the soul also has Evarim. They are called the Keiches HaNefesh, the faculties. So the faculties of the soul are like limbs of the Nefesh. Obviously, they're not physical. They're more like faculties, attributes, but they're compared to Evarim Shebeguf. So just like the body has, let's say, a head, a body, and leg, the same too in the nefesh. There's also keiches that are made up of parts. Ubeguf hari basar ha'ekev, and in the body, the basar ha'ekev, the flesh of the heel. Ima yesi gamu keli le'er v'chayes ha'nefesh. Even though it is also keli ve'er, the heel of the human body, the heel of the foot, is the most extreme, it's the extremity, the lowest part of the body, has very little powerful faculties within it. He says, nevertheless, the life force of the soul, it's a keli to the er v'chayes hanefesh, just as much as the chemer hamoyach, just as the body, just as the physical brain. In other words, when we say a person is alive, is the physical brain more alive than the heel of the foot? No, they're all the soul is the whole human body from head to toe. That's what we learned there. Is an equal keli for life. We're not talking about faculty now. We're not talking about revelation. We're talking about life itself. They're all alive. It's one living body. She says like this. But nevertheless, ain't a day maklal. You can't compare the heel to the head, to the mind. The imayez the chemer hamoyach. And even though the chemer hamoyach, the actual physical brain, hu me'ula kol kach, is so superior, is so more refined, so me'ula, so more. I'm not sure how to define me'ula here. Better.
Superior?
I said superior. Let's say superior. To the point, Atzem Esachedim Klei HaSeichel Mamish. In other words, even though, yes, it's true, when you say the flesh of the heel, the whole body has flesh. And the brain itself is also fleshy. It's also made up of matter. However, it's far more refined matter because it becomes one with the seichel. If you took the flesh of this is going to sound grotesque, but if you took the flesh of the heel and put it into the brain, it wouldn't exactly be the keli for seichel. And yet, so there's an equalizer, they're all part of life. So he says, to the point that gets united mamish with seichel. The brain itself is one with seichel, with intelligence. To the extent that through intensive or through an abundance of involvement, hisaskus, of exertion in seichel and muskolis and ideas, nasa hagdola v'tzmicha, the actual brain grows, enlarges and grows. Shemizgadol chemrei mamish. Its very physical brain grows larger. The Rebbe explains this, that it says in some place in Chassidus that the brain develops kamotim, connection, like folds. Because when you work the brain, there are more folds. And those folds, therefore, as they close in, the brain expands. So it both concentrates and expands. That's what the Rebbe explains in this idea. Because obviously we know the brain is a limited thing. It can't explode the brain, but they say that the brain does go through physical changes as a person exerts themselves with their mind. This would need a little research on today's science about it. But that's what he says here clearly. So what do you see from this? That it's not just a cup of water. The cup doesn't get affected by the water in it. The brain, the physical keli, meyach, chemer, hamoyach, gets affected and expands due to the seichel that you're involved in. He still didn't finish the sentence. We'll see where he's going with this. Nevertheless, it's a chumri and not a ruchni. With all that said, that the keli is so refined, it's still, at the end of the day, it's a piece of flesh. After Meva Esrim Shana, when the soul leaves the body, the brain remains. It's a piece of dead flesh. However, while the mind was there, it was refined and elevated and so on. So though on one hand, therefore, the heel and the mind and the brain are very different, but there's an aspect where they're the same in the sense they all are getting life energy. When you say a person is alive, you're alive from head to toe. Now he's going to bring this as Evrei Haguf. How about Evrei HaNeshama now? So he says, Hinekenu be'Evrei HaNefesh. Sorry, Evrei HaNefesh. Same thing as with the limbs, so to speak, the parts of the faculties of the soul. The imayez the koyach hatnuah who koyach hayesher achren, even though the power of movement is relative to higher faculties, it is koyach hayesher is the lowest of all faculties. Movement, it doesn't require deep intelligent movement, as anyone can move, just like the heel. Bekeches hanefesh is the lowest faculty among the faculties of the soul. B'kol mokem hu koyach ruchni. Nevertheless, it's a koyach ruchni. It's still, however, an ethereal faculty. It's not a physical thing. It's just a diminished faculty in the sense. However, it's not similar. You can't compare it to a much more superior, loftier faculty among the parts of the nefesh, shu koyach haseichel, which is the power of intelligence. So movement, even a baby moves. You don't need any intelligence to move. It doesn't require any particular soul power. It's the basic thing. A living thing moves. Whether it's an intelligent person, whether it's a tzaddik, whether it's the highest neshama, the lowest neshama, movement on this earth, meaning a chai misnaneya, is an equalizer. So in that sense, it doesn't come to keich haseichel. But on the other hand, there's something in common. It's like, at the end of the day, it's a ruchni. And what's the comparison? Evrei haguf, he said the same thing the other way around. That even though the seichel is superior, the brain is superior to the heel, but they still have something about them that they're all gashmi. At the end of the day, they're all physical. So yes, there is a hierarchy in the level of their so-called power, difference between the brain, the physical brain, and the physical heel, the flesh. But at the end of the day, they're all flesh. And they're all equal, receiving the energy of life force from the soul. In the neshama, in the nefesh, the other way around. That they're different in their faculties. Keich HaTanu is far lower than seichel, but they're all ruchni. That's the comparison he's making here. Kol makom keich ruchni. El she'ena dema to seichel. The bizgalus seichel, when seichel is revealed, ba yedei yigia, the bizgalus seichel ba yedei yigia. How do you read this? No, I'm sorry. Read it differently. The bizgalus, when you talk about in a revealed state, haseichel ba yedei yigia. Seichel comes through effort. Because before you use your seichel, it's only in a potential state. There's no existing idea yet. So you need to exert yourself to draw out from the koyach ha-seichel into seichel. From mitzias, from loy mitzias to mitzias. U'maloi mitzias, hu idea yigiyah. And how do you draw something out in a state that's not yet an existent idea? It's through a yigiyah effort. Kedugmas, heitzos ha'esh mitzura chalomish. Like, for example, the drawing out of sparks from a flintstone. That doesn't come easily. You have to exert yourself. We learned this earlier. That comes by striking it with strength, with intensity. On the other hand, the power of movement does not require such effort. It's the lowest faculty in the so-called parts of the soul. Even though also before you move, until you move, there's also, before you move, there was no movement, and now there's movement. It comes without any effort. And the reason for that is, because by its very identity, it's a koyach that's ready, it's right at the threshold, right at the doorstep of movement. So it doesn't require this leap from a state of such deep potential that you need that effort, that yigiyah. Here it's ready it's ready. It's like having someone, he's just not functioning yet, but it's about ready to function. And yet, despite this difference, that tenua has with seichel, it's still a not physical faculty, it's a ethereal, a sublime faculty. Which means all the possible movements, the details in their source, they are united in the klal in a yichud gamur, total, utter unity. Now he uses the word klal. Before he used the word that was higher than klal and prat. Okay, so what did he add here? He added that, he said that in koyach hatanua there's two ways. One is once there's specific movement, then afterwards it recedes back when you rest. It says that's echad. The details, manifest in details, and now the details are going back to their source and uniting back with their original power of movement. Then he says there's a yochid level. Before it acts activated, the koyach hatanua, everything remains there in that form of total, utter unity that's not made of details because there's no details yet. So what did the Frierdiker Rebbe qualify? He said, and even though koyach hatanua is different because it's ready to function, it's right at the, like I said, right, ready to function, but still it hasn't functioned yet. So therefore, in the general category, it still belongs in the category of Chaychas HaNefesh, and there things are all encompassed in one utter unity and have not connected to details. In the body, he said the other way around. The body is all about chaymer, about something of flesh. So there's distinctions, but it's all flesh, it's all physical, tangible. In Chaychas HaNefesh, whether it's the Tenuah or Seichel, even the lowest faculty is all really a spiritual element. And therefore, in a way, it's all encompassed in a potential state that is not yet connected to details. That's what it seems like he's saying here. We'll stop here, but he's going to now say what the dogma for this is the Esses Firis Agnuzis. And I'm still thinking, I think once we finish, it'll probably become clear why he needs this long example. It's trying to explain. It's like when I give the example with the artist, that the artist, before he starts creating art, he envisions everything. But that envisioning is all in a very ethereal and very ruchnisdik state. Everything is still one. There's no real details yet. When he starts painting, that's when it gets that's where you go into the chaymer, into the body, into the details. So that's the koyach hatanua once he's moving. So there's the details, and you connect the details to the klal. But the way they're all still in the klal, meaning in the koyach klali of movement, it's all in a state of utter unity, even though later it will become actualized. It's a very interesting and very abstract example, I have to say. Needs a lot more thought, but let's see what he says with Esses Firis Agnuzis after tomorrow, and we'll try to understand what this means back in the moshel. I know it sounds interesting that the nimshal is going to help us understand the moshel, when it's really meant to be the other way around, but so be it. Okay, we'll stop